I'm glad to have Michael Frost with us today. And Michael is an author. He is a theologian. He's a practitioner. He's a troublemaker. He's an instigator. He is all-around great guy. I've been glad to get to know him, not just through all the glowing words that Alan Hirsch speaks of you, but also the little time we got to spend last April together. Michael, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Stu.
Well, we're actually doing a series on risk and adventure, and we're going to be previewing the new book that you and Alan wrote together called The Faith of Leap. We've talked to Alan a little bit about the book as well, and excited that it's coming out, I think, on a topic that is hitting a nerve in really kind of our middle-class sensibilities here, specifically in America, but broadly in the West in general. Can you tell us a little bit about what sparked the drive to write the book? What kind of question were you trying to answer when you and Alan got together to write the book specifically?
Oh, well, that's a bit of an interesting question in the sense that we didn't actually originally set out to write about risk or adventure or the way in which that catalyzes faith and shapes community. We actually set out to write about communitas. So anyone who's familiar with anything Alan's written before, anything I've written before, we've mentioned communitas as a significant aspect. Alan calls it part of his MDNA, the missional DNA. And so originally the book was going to be around looking at the internal life of a faith community shaped by mission. But it seemed as though we had both touched on that in a few different books separately and together, and some other people had written about that. And it was kind of a situation where the book sort of took its own life and we ended up engaging more around the issue of the way in which risk and adventure actually shapes faith, and the way in which, of course, mission provides the best context for genuine Christian risk engagement. And so, yeah, it's kind of a book that took hold of us rather than us kind of, steering it in any particular direction.
When it comes to the topic of risk and how that applies to faith, and I've been so informed personally by what you and Alan have written about communitas and, a community that's forged in kind of the fires of risk and adventure and mission, and really stepping, the going out part, the embedding part, the things that make us uncomfortable, the things that stretch us as a community. One of the things that we always run into, or at least I've run into, is just that it seems like it's like a rubber band. Like the risk pushes you out, but there's always that pull of security. Why do you think security is so appealing? I mean, not just in the West in general, but in America specifically. Why is that so appealing to us?
Well, there's the obvious, physical aspects of security. If you feel safe and comfortable and what have you. But I'd say at a deeper psycho-spiritual level, security is one of the greatest psycho-spiritual illusions, because it gives us the impression that we are in control of our world, that we are the masters of our destiny, the rulers of our world. And I mean, for those of us who are Christian, we know that that's not the case. I mean, we know in some intellectual sense, God is in control. I mean, but our attempt to create a world in which everything is secure and safe and manageable is really our psycho-spiritual grasp at trying to fend off or hold on to, the illusion and fend off the reality that ultimately we are not in control of our world. And so when situations happen, like, in my country here in Australia, we've just had biggest cyclone on record, and we've had massive floods, and our near neighbour New Zealand had this massive earthquake. I know that America's had all sorts of natural calamities. We had the earthquake and tsunami in Japan and the like. And so when these things happen, they are incredibly disturbing to humankind, because they are reminders, massive reminders, maybe we are not actually in control of our world and our life. So it breaks in on us in situations like that. But by and large, particularly people say my country, Australia, and yours in the United States, we have managed to create a world where we've pushed the reality of our puniness in the scheme of things back to the edges of our experience. And so I think security is intoxicating because it helps us to hold on to the lie that we are in charge of our world. And yet, there is something in us that still needs to know that we're not in control. And so I think that explains why scary movies or theme park rides or high-risk adventure sports and things like that. That's why these things are so popular, because I think they're little release valves. They're little manageable, controlled experiences of being out of control, because we need to be told again and again we are not in charge of our world, even though we hate to hear that. I mean, that was maybe a fairly highfalutin kind of answer to that question, but I think it's more than just about greed and materialism and all the stuff that a lot of Americans are concerned about. I think at an even deeper level, it is about us wanting to believe that we are the God of our own world, even though deeper down we couldn't bear to imagine that that could be true.
Now, you mentioned the book, The Faith of Leap, specifically deals with how risk and adventure really apply or are applicable to our faith experience, maybe separate from how it's applied to, an experience of a communitas, a community that's engaging in that. What do you think it means for a Christian to experience adventure in their own faith journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if what I was saying before is true, that our grasp at security is our way of trying to stave off the idea that we're not in control of our world, then I think for Christians, mission is the most faith-expanding experience of all, because it actually takes us out into an experience of being out of control. So that whether that might be just the possibility of failure or disappointment that mission throws up, or whether it's spiritual warfare, or whether it's persecution, whatever it might be, it is a faith-expanding experience of the fact that we have stepped into a world where we are not the masters of that world, but that God is at work. And so I would say that mission is one of the most faith-expanding experiences, and it also takes us back to that really deep psycho-spiritual reality of our place in the scheme of things. And I think it does it in a way that some of the other experiences, say, of worship or of Christian community, of teaching and learning, not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, but there's a way in which sometimes we can control those experiences. But engaging in mission is really stepping into an out-of-control world, but daring to believe that God is in control in the midst of all of that. So, mission is valuable because we live in a lost world, and mission is valuable because there are people who are suffering, and mission is valuable because the church, should grow, and all those kind of conventional motivations. But I'd also say mission is life as it was intended to be lived. It's the place where we are invited to dare to trust, even if all the evidence is to the contrary, that God is actually in control and his kingdom is unfolding inexorably throughout history and around the world. And it's actually in that missional context that those kinds of realities become much more in focus.
Yeah, that's good. Can you, would you mind sharing a story or two from your life of maybe when you've lived out a risk, an adventure, or risk-taking, experience of risk-taking faith, and what that has done for you personally?
Well, when you plant churches, it's a risk advance. I mean, look, I think before I planted the first church that I planted, I was teaching at a seminary and writing books and speaking, and I realized, I was a pretty young guy, but I realized that I was the master of everything I could do. Like, at wasn't going to walk into a class, and it wasn't fraught with the possibility of failure. I mean, I knew what I was going to teach. I pretty much knew every question a student was going to ask. I could write or teach or speak, and I was in control of this. I knew how to do this. I mean, I'm not saying that what I was doing was bad, but when you take a little band of brothers and sisters into a community to start a new faith community, it's fraught with the possibility of failure. It invites the possibility of spiritual warfare, of persecution, of being misunderstood, of disappointing people. And the church planting is the classic sort of risk adventure. But, I've taken short-term mission trip teams to Cambodia or Thailand or places like that. And I've watched the way in which that kind of missional risk it does one of two things. It either binds people together in the most intimate sense of brotherly and sisterly communitas, or it tears you apart. I mean, I've never seen so much conflict as in a church planting situation or a short-term mission situation, precisely because of the sort of white-hot pressure cooker experience that you're in, and the way people react when things seem out of control. So when people feel like there's too much poverty or too much pain or there's too much unbelief, or when it seems like we can't control our circumstances, it's interesting to watch how people respond. Either we're thrown back onto faith in God and to trust in Him and to look for Him in the midst of that, or we feel that we have to take charge, and that's where conflict often occurs. So I think it's in Exiles I tell the story of going to Vietnam and taking a group of people to what we thought was going to be an orphanage to play with kids and give out toys, and it turned out to basically be a hospice for physically and intellectually disabled kids and chronically and dreadfully disabled. And so I led a group of people in their 20s basically into this very, very chronic and very confronting experience. And I mean, I watched the way in which that team just coalesced around support for each other in the midst of what was very confronting. But I also watched, 2 or 3 of our team just say, I'm out. I have to leave. And the way that had to be processed afterwards, they couldn't bear the idea that humankind could be this out of control. Where is God in the midst of this? And so, I think people who would be watching this we go to Southeast Asia on short-term mission trips, so you go to Latin America or South America or something, but I'm sure people would have experienced what that's like. It's a little manageable experience of the out-of-controlness of mission, and I'm sure people have known what it's like for either that to come unstuck or for it to bind people together dramatically. But my concern would be that we not only have these experiences, for 2 weeks a year or something, but rather we try to find what it is like to step into our neighbourhood, to be engaged with our neighbours, our friends, our community, our city, in a way which invites that same ongoing risk. Maybe not as white hot as a short-term mission trip is, but in an ongoing engagement with the lives of people who may misunderstand us or hate us or attack us or love us or whatever the case may be.
You mentioned before how security can tend to pull that risk-taking faith back. What are some things from your experience that you've seen, maybe practical steps that Christians can take in order to kind of let go of that the idolatry of security, the how we want to co-opt the gospel in the name of the family, or the name of security, or the name of middle class sensibility. We want to co-opt the gospel, make it into a social club, make it into a country club, make it into something safe and secure. How can we begin to break that bondage, that idolatry that comes with obsessing over security and convenience and ease and comfort?
Yeah, I think short of saying, well, I'll go to Mexico and build a hospital next week or something like that, I think take a step into somebody else's life or into a neighbourhood or community's life, and it's a slippery slope. That's been my experience. It's like once you enter into somebody's life, it's very hard to say, oh, I'm only going to go so far as I feel in control, and that's all thanks. I mean, if you take the first few steps seriously, it will drag you further and further into community and relationship, and ultimately, for those of us who are Christian, into mission. So I would say, some steps that just put you into intimate partnership with people who don't yet know Jesus is a fantastic way just to take the kind of the baby steps into the risk or adventure of mission. So, I mean, in our community, to belong, I mean, sort of requirements of membership are that you must eat with 3 people every week, at least one of whom should not be a member of our church, and that you need to, bless 3 people every week, at least one of whom should not be a member of our church. So, you just start eating with some people. I mean, you just bless people, give them a gift, send them words of encouragement, affirm them in some way, do them a favour. I mean, you just step into their life in some way, join a neighbourhood community group, start to volunteer for a community service project. I can't remember the name of this movie. You might remember it, Stu. It's Robert Downey Jr. and he connects with this homeless guy who's played by Jamie Foxx, and who's a great cellist, but has now hit Skid Row and he's living on the streets. And the Robert Downey Jr. character, who's a journalist, thinks, well, I mean, I'll do something really, really good and wonderful. And he buys him a cello, and then he realises he's got nowhere to keep it, and so he connects to a community centre, and then he realises he needs lessons, and then he thinks he needs to get him some housing. And so he's drawn further and further into this person's life, all the time thinking, if I just buy him a cello, that'll fix things. Or if I just get him some public housing, that'll fix things. So he's trying to get to the end point of this friendship, like, done, fixed. Now I can withdraw. And there's a line about 2/3 of the way through the film where the Robert Downey Jr. Character's girlfriend says to him, you don't want to be this man's friend. You just want to fix this man. Mm-hmm. But if you dare to become his friend, it'll be messy and organic and risky and painful and all the things that relationship is. And I remember, I can't remember the name of that film now, but I remember thinking, that's mission. That's what that is. It's like, if we go in thinking we can fix somebody, that's our desire for control and security. That's us, the master of our destiny. Yeah. I'll buy them this, I'll fix that, I'll do this, it's done, and now see ya, like the Lone Ranger, my work here is done, and we back out again. But that's not risk. Risk is when I step into someone's life and I start to eat with them, or I start to bless them in some way, and one thing leads to another, to another, to another, to another, and it's messy and painful and difficult. I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to be friends to our neighbours and to our city, or do we want to fix them? And if you want to fix them, well, you're the one who's in control. And then I don't think it sounds very risky at all. But if you want to be their friend, if you want to love them, serve them, hear from them, eat with them, that is organic and messy and painful. There's no end in sight. It goes on and on and on. And I think that's life as it was intended to be. I think when Paul writes his letters to the churches of Asia Minor, he's assuming that no one's going to leave Ephesus at some point. I mean, you're there forever. I mean, you're there at Thessalonica forever. You're their friend and their neighbour forever. It's not, you're not fixing Ephesus and now I'm getting out of here. And so I guess the first steps would be just bless a few people every week. Go and eat with a few people every week. Volunteer for a local community group. Go talk to your mayor or the police chief or the school principal. Find out, who's in need in this place. I mean, really simple, earthy, organic neighbourhood ways of stepping out. I mean, my big fear with the Faith of Leap was, as we were writing it, we were telling lots of dramatic stories about wild and crazy risk takers. And Alan and I realised, hang on, are we asking everyone to just get into a coracle on the east coast of Ireland and just push out to sea and see where the Holy Spirit leads them? Or are we really asking ordinary suburban people to embrace the risk of mission in their contexts, as ordinary or everyday as that might be, it is still an enormous risk, because you're letting go of the control of your own world and the extent of your relationships. And so, yeah, it can be suburban and ordinary, but it can also be terrifying.
That's awesome. That's great that you say that. You know, one of the exciting things about what it seems like God seems to be doing, specifically here in America, is helping us recover the missional side of things. The going out, the sending out, the as the Father has sent me, so I send you part of it. And what I hear you saying is to have a fully formed faith that's being led by Jesus, and you're not controlling everything. What you're saying is, or at least what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not just about mission, but it's that mission is incarnation. It's being with, it's blessing, it's you're there in your village, in your city, in your neighborhood, in your community, on your street, reaching out, not just here's a track or whatever, but really getting in the lives, having a relational presence, being a friend of the people that God has sent us to. And that's, man, I hope that with all the missional talk and the missional buzz that's kind of going around, I hope we don't miss the side of mission that is incarnation. The end of mission is incarnation. And it sounds like that's, what you're saying is, if you want that risk, you want to take that risk, incarnate the gospel in a relational context make a friend, be there, be present, be available, be with them, help, serve, all that. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but it's refreshing to hear you say that.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. And I think that, the great era of missions, the 19th century, where everyone was heading off to India and Africa and Burma and places, all writing books, these incredible tales of daring do, and people just thought, wow, that's mission, that's as it is. And, I don't begrudge them writing their stories and the like, but we mustn't fall into the mistake of imagining that that's where it happens. It's got to be exciting and dramatic and wild. I mean, it can be ordinary and organic, but there's something so extraordinary about that anyway, isn't it? It's like eating with people, serving people, loving people. We oughtn't to despise that as being unexciting. And the risk is that you might have to take people into your home, or you might have to give away something that you own, that you might have to give up your spare time in a way. I mean, it's inconveniencing. It's all that stuff we began talking about. It's about not being in control necessarily of it all the time. And it's about, as you say, the incarnational engagement over the long haul. I remember hearing Scott Peck speak, and he was talking about how he had a client who was really depressed and, very, very psychologically unwell. And she turned up late for an appointment once, and she came in. She apologised. She said, "My car didn't work. I asked my neighbour for a lift to this appointment with you." And she said, "Yeah, I can give you a ride, but I've got to go by the hospital. I volunteer in the hospital. I just go and visit people and hand out stuff and what have you. And you can come along with me, and then I'll drop you at your appointment." And so this client of Scott Peck's had inadvertently ended up doing some hospital rounds, handing out gifts and what have you. And by the time she came to the appointment, she was just beaming. She was alive. She was just so excited. And he said, look at you. Like you've served somebody else and you've come to life. And she says, "You're right. It's fantastic." And he said, "Well, why don't you just do that, every week?" And she looked at him and she said, "You mean I've got to do this every week?" And it was a great illustration of the fact that we know the power, the value of serving other people, but do we want to do it every week? Like, do we want to be available all the time? I mean, I think that's the inherent risk of neighbourhood mission. And if we're not prepared to embrace it, I don't think anyone's going to be any more interested in attending our church services because we got, better music or better preaching than anybody else. I think, we've entertained the American Christian market to the max now. So it's like they've had it all. Nothing intrigues them or excites them any longer. So how many other ways can you try to attract people into your gatherings? We now know that the only way forward is for us, as an army of hundreds of thousands of believers, to actually infiltrate our neighbourhoods and to take the risk of loving, gracious, long-term service of our neighbours. And I honestly think that can create tipping point in a culture.
Well, Michael, thanks so much for joining us today, and we look forward to the book coming out. Well, it's already out. We look forward to previewing it here on the side, and look forward to hearing more from you and really encourage you to continue writing. I love what you've written, and it's really, I think, really helped a lot of people, especially here in the States, that are recovering again what it means to live out the mission of God in our context. So, thanks so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure, and thanks for your interest and your support. I appreciate it, Stu. Bless you.
You bet.